August 17, 1944, northern France, near Falaise. The GMC CCKW sat abandoned on the roadside, its canvas cover shredded by shrapnel, the engine still ticking with heat. Smoke drifted over the wheat fields from the wreckage of an American convoy ambushed only hours earlier. The Luftwaffe had made a rare appearance, a desperate strike during Germany's retreat through France. A small German recovery unit from the 276th Infantry Division arrived, their boots crunching over glass and gravel. One of the mechanics, his uniform stained with grease and sweat, squinted at the massive truck before him. "Get the Hauptfeldwebel," he shouted. "This one's intact!" The others gathered around the strange machine. The Americans called it a deuce and a half, 2.5 tons of raw utility. It towered over the German Opel Blitz trucks parked behind it, its frame heavier, tires broader, stance prouder. But when the mechanics opened the hood, confusion spread. It wasn't some over-engineered monster of foreign complexity. The inline 6-cylinder engine sat exposed and accessible, its components marked with clear English labels: fuel pump, filter, ignition. Even the wiring was neatly organized and color-coded. "Simple," one muttered. "Too simple." The senior mechanic, a veteran of the Africa Corps, ran a hand along the frame. "No armor, no frills, but this?" He tapped a bracket welded perfectly in place. "It was built by people who understand roads, not just wars." As the men inspected the undercarriage and suspension, something unsettling settled among them. This truck wasn't fragile like theirs. It was sturdy, efficient, made to last. They exchanged glances, unspoken understanding hanging heavy in the air. What they had found wasn't just an enemy vehicle. It was proof, quiet, undeniable proof, that Germany wasn't losing because of bravery or tactics. They were losing because of machines like this one. The morning sun rose slowly over the battered French countryside, illuminating rows of burned-out vehicles and shattered helmets scattered along the narrow road. Among them, the GMC CCKW stood like a survivor of its own war, battered, but still breathing. The German mechanics had dragged it off the road into a makeshift repair area beside a hedgerow. The senior mechanic, Feldwebel Otto Kruger, crouched beside the truck with a cigarette clenched between his lips. His men waited for orders, their curiosity outweighing exhaustion. Kruger had seen hundreds of German vehicles, from the nimble Kubelwagen to the massive half-tracks that broke down more often than they fought. But nothing about this American machine fit the usual logic of war engineering. "Remove the plugs," Kruger ordered. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Within minutes, Private Miller had the tools laid out, though he barely needed any. The engine was practically inviting them in. No layers of armor or complex casings. No hidden compartments that required specialized tools. Everything was within reach, as if the truck had been designed for a farmer, not a soldier. Kruger pulled apart free and stared at it in disbelief. "Look at this machining," he said quietly. "Precise, uniform, not handmade. Mass-produced. That word mass-produced hung in the air like a ghost. German craftsmanship was legendary, but it came at a price. Time. Every part of a Wehrmacht vehicle demanded precision from trained specialists. If a gearbox failed, it took days to replace. Here, everything was standardized, interchangeable, replaceable. "This bolt could fit on any of their trucks," Miller muttered, testing a wrench on another panel. "It's all the same size," Kruger nodded. "That's the genius of it." He stood up, wiping oil from his hands, and looked across the field toward the distant rumble of artillery. "We built vehicles for pride," he said. They built vehicles for war. As they explored further, they found small details that seemed almost trivial until they weren't. The seats were simple metal frames with removable cushions. The canvas top could be detached with a few quick latches. The tools were stored in marked compartments. The spare tire easy to reach. Everything about the design screamed speed of repair, not perfection. This truck could be stripped, fixed, and running again in an hour, Kruger said. "Hours take a day just to diagnose." The younger soldiers laughed nervously. It was the kind of uncomfortable laugh men used when they realized they might be looking at their own defeat. A soft wind rolled through the hedgerow. The war had turned against Germany, but standing here beside this American truck, the reason felt clearer than any propaganda could admit. It wasn't that the Allies were stronger. It was that they were smarter in how they fought. While German engineers obsessed over detail and complexity, the Americans had built something that worked. Something anyone could drive, fix, and send back into battle within hours. Kruger lit another cigarette and stared at the big white star painted on the truck's door. "You know," he said softly, "this isn't just a vehicle. It's a factory on wheels. Every soldier who drives one is part of the same machine. Miller tilted his head. And us? Kruger smiled grimly. We're the cogs in a system too proud to change. The men fell silent. The distant thud of artillery echoed again. The sound of a war slowly slipping away. The mechanic reached for the ignition switch, curiosity burning through exhaustion. Let's see if she still runs, he said. When the engine roared to life on the first turn of the key, the men froze. No stalling. No coughing. Just smooth, confident power, and in that moment, none of them could deny it. The enemy had built a better future. One bolt at a time. The sound of that engine running smooth and steady seemed to silence the battlefield for a moment. The men stood there staring at the truck like it was some kind of ghost. Something that shouldn't still be alive after taking shrapnel, after rolling through chaos, after being left for dead. But the GMC CCKW didn't care. It just purred, steady and strong, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Feldwebel Otto Kruger climbed into the driver's seat, his heavy boots creaking against the metal floorboards. Incredible, he muttered. His fingers traced the dashboard, every gauge labeled, every control simple and clear. There were no complicated dials like on a German Opel or Mercedes troop carrier. No cluster of tiny switches designed by men who had never fought in the field. Just straightforward, logical design, one lever, one function. He turned to his men, a half smile on his face. You could teach a farmer to drive this in an hour. The others chuckled, but their amusement faded quickly. Because Kruger was right. The Americans hadn't built machines for elite soldiers or mechanics. They had built them for everyone. Soldiers from farms, factories, and city streets could drive and repair them. The brilliance wasn't in perfection. It was in practicality. Private Miller climbed into the passenger seat, glancing at the rear cargo bed. Look at all this space, he said. You could carry a squad, supplies, even fuel barrels. Kruger nodded, pressing the clutch. Or tow artillery through the mud. The truck moved forward effortlessly, rolling over the uneven ground like it had been born for it. The suspension absorbed the ruts and rocks with a quiet ease that stunned the men. Our half-tracks would rattle their bolts loose in 5 minutes, Miller said. Kruger shifted gears. This thing drives smoother than a staff car. They took it down a dirt trail, past the burned-out remains of German and Allied vehicles. The truck didn't complain once. It didn't cough, didn't whine. The steering was firm but predictable. Kruger couldn't stop himself from grinning. Do you feel that? He said, pressing the pedal. Balanced, stable. It's heavy, but not sluggish. The road curved into a muddy patch, the kind that swallowed German trucks whole. Kruger steered straight into it, and the GMC didn't even hesitate. The tires dug in, the torque pushed it through, and within seconds, they were out the other side. The men in the back shouted over the roar of the engine. How? It's not even four-wheel drive. Kruger laughed, a short, amazed laugh. Yes, it is, actually. Transfer case under the seat. Full-time all-wheel drive. He pointed down, and sure enough, there it was. A lever clearly marked with simple English instructions. One pull engaged the front wheels. No mechanical trickery, no over-engineering, just clarity. By the time they circled back to camp, a small crowd had gathered. Officers, engineers, even infantrymen wanted to see it. They'd heard rumors about captured American trucks, but few had seen one this intact. Kruger climbed down, wiping sweat from his forehead. The look on his face said it all. This, he said, is how they win wars. Not with fancy tanks, not with aces in the sky, but with trucks like this that never quit. An officer approached, clipboard in hand. Report, Feldwebel? Kruger took a long drag of his cigarette. It's built like nothing we have. Everything is accessible. Everything is replaceable. It's foolproof, the officer frowned. And what do you recommend? Kruger exhaled slowly. We copy it, or we lose. But deep down, they both knew the truth. Germany couldn't copy this. Not the design, not the philosophy. The Reich built machines of pride. America built machines of purpose. As the truck idled behind them, the insignia on its hood, that simple white star, seemed to glow under the fading sun. It wasn't just a symbol of a nation. It was the mark of an industry that understood something Germany never had. That reliability wins wars. The next morning, the camp buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread across the regiment. The captured American truck was still running, and the mechanics were going to test it under real combat conditions. Even officers who normally scoffed at Allied engineering now stood by to watch. The air was heavy with diesel and dust as Kruger climbed into the driver's seat once again. The GMC CCKW, its olive drab paint chipped and scarred, stood ready like a loyal beast of burden. Its engine had started instantly that morning. No coaxing, no elaborate warm-up procedures. Just a twist of the key and a steady, confident rumble. "Let's see what your Yankee toy can really do," sneered Captain Weiss, arms folded, his boots planted in the mud. Kruger gave a half-smile. "With pleasure, Herr Hauptmann." He eased the clutch, and the deuce and a half rolled forward. The convoy of German observers followed in their own vehicles, an Opel Blitz, a few staff cars, even a half-track. The test route would cover everything. Mud, inclines, deep ruts, even a makeshift river crossing. The first obstacle came quickly, a hill of loose earth left by artillery fire. The Opel Blitz, lighter but less powerful, struggled halfway up before its tires spun uselessly. The GMC followed right after, its 6 wheels biting into the dirt. The men held their breath. The truck climbed steadily, the engine humming with controlled power. No strain, no jerking motion. Within seconds it reached the crest, smooth as if the slope were nothing. "Impossible," one mechanic whispered. "No German truck does that without wheel chains." Kruger grinned through the windshield, tapping the dash. "It's not power, it's balance." They moved to the next challenge, a shallow stream with a rocky bed. The German vehicles halted. It was standard procedure. Check depth, inspect footing, plan the crossing. Kruger didn't even slow down. The GMC rolled straight in. Water splashed high against the grill, but the truck didn't falter. Its high intake and sealed electricals kept it alive. The exhaust bubbled beneath the surface before emerging on the other side, still idling like nothing had happened. Captain Weiss's jaw tightened. "Reckless fool," he muttered. But the mechanics watching didn't see recklessness. They saw confidence. Confidence in a design that seemed to anticipate everything a soldier could face in the field. The convoy continued down rough terrain, through potholes and sand. By mid-afternoon, Kruger pulled to a stop near a ridge. He cut the engine and jumped down. "Feel the engine block," he said to the others. "Barely warm." Muller placed his hand against the metal. "How?" "We've been running for hours." "Airflow," Kruger replied, pointing to the grill. "And cooling design. It's efficient. Everything about this truck is efficient." They stood silently for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. The realization was settling in. The Americans hadn't just built a vehicle. They'd built a lifeline. Something soldiers could depend on anywhere. Desert, forest, or snow. Captain Weiss approached, trying to hide his unease. "So what are you saying, Kruger? That we're inferior?" Kruger hesitated, glancing at the men gathered around. "No, sir. I'm saying we overthink everything. We build machines to impress engineers. They build machines to serve soldiers." Weiss said nothing. The truth was too clear to argue. Later that evening, back at the camp, Kruger sat with his men around a small fire. The truck stood in the background, its silhouette framed by the glow. One of the younger mechanics spoke up quietly. "If every American convoy has hundreds of these, how do we compete?" Kruger looked into the flames. "We don't. Not with complexity. Not anymore." He took a long drag from his cigarette, his expression unreadable. "When you fight an army that builds trucks this good, trucks that never quit, never break, you aren't just fighting soldiers." He flicked the cigarette into the dirt. "You're fighting an entire industry that already knows how to win." The others said nothing. The fire crackled softly as the realization sank in. This wasn't just about a truck anymore. It was about a nation that understood the value of simplicity. And a war that Germany could no longer win through design alone. 3 days later, the captured GMC was still running, tirelessly. Every dawn, Kruger and his men gathered around it, waiting for something to fail. They expected leaks, cracks, or broken fittings, the kind of mechanical fatigue they'd grown accustomed to with German vehicles after long field use. But each time they opened the hood, the engine looked as though it had been assembled that morning. No oil drips, no warped metal, no burnt smell. By the 4th morning, even Captain Weiss's skepticism had worn thin. "If you're so confident," he said, crossing his arms, "let's load it up." Kruger's brow furrowed. "Fully loaded, Herr Hauptmann?" "Exactly," Weiss replied. "Let's see if this American brute can pull its weight." The men spent hours filling the bed of the truck, crates of ammunition, fuel drums, spare parts, even steel track sections from a disabled panzer. When they were finished, the truck sagged slightly on its suspension, but not alarmingly so. Kruger climbed into the driver's seat once again, started the engine with a single twist, and pressed the accelerator. The GMC growled, deep, confident, and began to move. They followed a dirt road winding up a slope, pockmarked by shell holes. The Opel Blitz that led the convoy struggled immediately, wheels spinning in the loose dirt, engine whining with the effort. When the GMC's turn came, the mechanics held their breath, but the American truck didn't just climb, it glided. The torque from its six-cylinder engine and low-range gearing handled the grade with an ease that felt almost unreal. Every rotation of the tires sent mud flying, but the rhythm stayed smooth. Kruger grinned behind the wheel. "This isn't a truck," he muttered to Miller beside him. "It's a mountain goat." Halfway up, a crater loomed, nearly 2 meters wide and half filled with rainwater. Weiss, watching from the hilltop, expected them to stop. But Kruger didn't even hesitate. He shifted down and aimed directly through it. The front wheels plunged, water splashed high over the hood, and then the truck emerged, still climbing, engine roaring with steady confidence. When they reached the top, the German mechanics erupted in cheers, genuine stunned admiration. "This truck could pull a tank," one shouted. Kruger shut off the engine and stepped down, wiping sweat and grime from his face. "And it probably would," he said, half joking. Weiss approached, his face unreadable. He ran a gloved hand along the fender, feeling the heat. "Still not boiling," he murmured. "Cooling system's efficient," Miller explained, pointing at the oversized radiator. "And look, no airlocks, no leaks." The captain looked back toward the road. "How do they make so many of these?" Kruger's answer came quietly. "Because they build for soldiers, not perfection. This isn't precision engineering, it's smart engineering." That afternoon, curiosity turned into experimentation. The mechanics began deliberately pushing the truck to its limits, removing air filters, running on low oil, even towing another disabled German truck behind it. Each time, the GMC kept going. Its tolerance for abuse defied every rule they'd been taught. At sunset, as the desert light turned golden, Kruger leaned against the truck's fender, exhausted but smiling. Around him, the younger mechanics were sketching diagrams, taking notes, trying to reverse engineer what they were seeing. Weiss approached again, slower this time. "If we had vehicles like this from the beginning," he said, "maybe the war would have gone differently." Kruger shook his head. "No, Herr Hauptmann. If we had this way of thinking, maybe then." The captain looked confused. "Simple, strong, and easy to fix," Kruger said. "That's what wins wars, not perfect designs, not fancy systems, just machines that don't stop." As darkness fell, they packed up their tools. The truck stood there, silent now. But it felt alive, a quiet symbol of what the Germans had failed to understand until it was too late. Kruger gave it one last look before walking back toward camp. "We build machines to serve pride," he murmured. "They build machines to serve men." He didn't say it out loud, but everyone felt it. The realization that this humble American truck, this deuce and a half, might have done more to win the war than 1,000 tanks ever could. 2 nights later, rain hammered the French countryside. The roads had turned into rivers of mud, the kind that swallowed men, boots, and machinery whole. The German column was ordered to move under cover of darkness, retreating east to avoid encirclement. Most of their vehicles had already broken down or been abandoned. Engines flooded, axles cracked, starved of fuel and parts. Even the mighty Tigers were left behind like stranded beasts. But the GMC, the captured American truck, still stood ready. Its olive green paint, now half caked in dirt and German dust, gleamed faintly under flashes of lightning. Kruger climbed into the driver's seat, rain dripping from his helmet. "Let's see what you've got left, my friend," he muttered, turning the ignition. The engine coughed once, then came to life with a smooth, reassuring growl. The convoy lurched forward into the storm. Within minutes, 2 German trucks bogged down on the first incline. Their engines roared helplessly as wheels spun in mud. Kruger downshifted, pressed gently on the accelerator, and the GMC powered through like it was driving on solid ground. The mechanics in the back gripped the rails, half in awe, half in disbelief. Behind them, a distant explosion tore through the night, Allied artillery. Weiss's voice barked through the rain. "Faster! Move that cargo, or we're finished. Kruger tightened his grip on the wheel. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle, but the road ahead glimmered faintly in the lightning flashes. He pushed forward, feeling the steering wheel tug and slide. Each time he thought the truck would sink, it clawed its way out again, the wide tires biting through the muck, the engine refusing to quit. At one point, a German Kübelwagen ahead of them slid sideways into a ditch, its wheels spinning uselessly. Without hesitation, Kruger shouted, "Hook the cable!" Müller jumped out into the mud, wrapped a chain around the smaller vehicle's frame, and signaled back. The GMC roared, and slowly, impossibly, dragged the stranded car free. The soldiers standing nearby could only stare. As the column pressed on, Kruger began to understand something deeper about the machine beneath him. It wasn't just powerful, it was forgiving. It didn't punish mistakes. It worked with the driver, not against him. Its design didn't demand precision. It allowed for chaos. In war, that was everything. Hours passed. The rain never stopped. Around midnight, the convoy reached a shallow river crossing. Every German vehicle hesitated. The water churned with debris, rushing fast enough to topple smaller trucks. Weiss turned to Kruger. "Can it do this?" Kruger didn't answer. He eased the truck forward. The headlights illuminated the water, dark and fierce. The front wheels entered, then the rear, the current pressing hard against the frame. The engine groaned, but the truck pushed on. The soldiers on the bank shouted encouragement. The water reached halfway up the doors. Still, it climbed. The exhaust sputtered, coughed, and then, with one last surge, the GMC rolled onto the opposite bank, dragging the rest of the convoy's courage with it. On the far side, Weiss climbed up beside Kruger, speechless. The rain plastered their uniforms to their bodies, their breath visible in the cold. The captain finally spoke. "This truck is a soldier," Kruger nodded, his hands trembling slightly on the wheel. "No, sir," he said quietly. "It's a workhorse that doesn't know how to quit." By dawn, the column reached safety. Of the 8 vehicles that began the night, only 3 remained operational, and the GMC led them all. When Kruger shut down the engine, the silence felt deafening. He climbed out, patted the hood, and whispered, "You've earned your place in history." Weiss, still watching the horizon, added, "Too bad it won't be in our history books." The men laughed softly. Tired and drenched, but they all knew the truth. They'd just witnessed something rare in war. A machine that didn't need loyalty, glory, or command to be great. It just was. And for the first time in years, German soldiers felt a strange, quiet admiration for something that wasn't built in Germany. By the time the captured GMC reached the repair depot at Chartres, word had already spread across several units. Mechanics from neighboring divisions came just to see the American truck that refused to die. It was parked beside rows of crippled German vehicles, twisted, burned-out frames that told the story of a war grinding down the Reich's industrial pride. Kruger stood beside it, wiping his hands on an oily rag as a group of German engineers from Berlin arrived. They wore crisp uniforms, their collars stiff with rank. One of them, Hauptingenieur Dietrich, carried a leather notebook filled with diagrams. He looked the truck up and down with the same disdain a jeweler might give to a piece of rough iron. "This," he said, gesturing to the muddy GMC, "is what's impressed everyone." Kruger nodded calmly. "It's not about looks, sir. It's what it does." Dietrich opened the hood, expecting complexity, an intricate maze of pipes and precision-machined parts. Instead, he found simplicity, wide spacing, clear markings, easily removable components. His eyebrows rose slightly. "Crude," he muttered. "But efficient," Kruger smirked. "Try replacing the fuel pump. Takes 5 minutes." The engineer gave a skeptical look but complied. With a few turns of a wrench, the pump came loose. No seized bolts, no special tools required. A German truck would have taken half an hour and an entire tool kit. "Unbelievable," Dietrich murmured, more to himself than anyone. Another engineer climbed into the driver's seat, curious. He turned the key. The engine came to life instantly, a smooth hum filling the depot. The man pressed the accelerator, watching the RPMs climb steadily without hesitation. Dietrich scribbled notes furiously. Simple carburetor design, oversized cooling system, reinforced transmission housing. He paused, looking toward Kruger. "How many of these did the Americans build?" Kruger shrugged. "Hundreds of thousands, maybe more." The engineers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them whistled low. "We can barely produce a few thousand trucks a year, and each one requires a team of trained machinists," another added. These are built for anyone to assemble." Weiss approached from across the depot, his boots clicking against the concrete. "Gentlemen, you're seeing the truth we've ignored for years," he said. "They don't win because they're cleverer. They win because they make more, and it all works." The engineers didn't respond immediately. One of them knelt by the front axle, tracing the reinforced suspension with his finger. "This could carry twice its rated load," he said, astonished. Kruger leaned against the fender, arms crossed. It did. Through mud, craters, and rivers. The engineers' expressions changed from skepticism to fascination. They began measuring, sketching, murmuring among themselves about materials and production efficiency. "This isn't advanced engineering," one of them said. "It's industrial philosophy." Dietrich closed his notebook. "And we've been following the wrong one." Weiss gave a grim nod. "Precision is a luxury. Endurance wins wars." For the next 2 hours, they continued their inspection, not as critics, but as students. They crawled beneath the chassis, disassembled parts, marveled at the modular design. Every discovery chipped away at years of German pride. Finally, Dietrich stood upright, his gloves blackened with grease. "If we had designed vehicles like this," he said, "we could have fought forever." Kruger shook his head. "Maybe. But you'd have had to build them differently. Build them for the soldier, not for the engineer." A silence fell over the group. Even the constant drone of distant artillery seemed muted. Weiss looked at the truck one last time. "This machine doesn't need medals or propaganda," he said softly. "It just works. Every time." As the engineers prepared to leave, one of them turned back to Kruger. "What will happen to it?" he asked. Kruger ran his hand over the GMC's side, his expression unreadable. "They'll take it apart, study it, maybe send the pieces to Berlin. But whatever they learn, it won't matter. Why not?" "Because they'll still try to make it perfect," Kruger replied. "And that's why they'll never make it simple." The engineers didn't argue. For the first time, they truly understood Germany's defeat wasn't just about bombs or battles. It was about an idea that refused to break down. Weeks later, the disassembled GMC truck arrived in Berlin under heavy guard. The parts were carefully laid out inside a massive Luftwaffe engineering hangar, once used to assemble fighter planes. The floor was covered with labeled components: engine, chassis, axles, wiring harnesses, all tagged and numbered in neat German handwriting. Above the entrance hung a sign: "Captured Materiel, Technical Evaluation." Dozens of senior engineers gathered around, notebooks in hand, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. The captured American truck was now officially a subject of study, not as a prize, but as a problem. How could something so unsophisticated work so well? At the center of the group stood Professor Helmut Krantz, a celebrated automotive designer whose career had been devoted to precision engineering. He had overseen half-tracks, tank engines, even early jet prototypes. But as he ran his fingers along the GMC's gearbox housing, he frowned. "This isn't design," he muttered. "It's adaptation." One of his assistants, a young technician named Vogel, looked up from the open engine block. "Professor, look at this. The crankshaft tolerances are loose, almost sloppy." Krantz raised an eyebrow. "Sloppy? Yes, sir. But that's just it. It works better. Less friction, less chance of seizing in dust or cold." Krantz said nothing for a long moment. Then he leaned closer, examining the connecting rods and bearings. He found what Vogel meant. The parts were simple but proportionally larger, sturdier, forgiving. They weren't chasing perfection. They were chasing reliability. "Genius through imperfection," Krantz whispered. Around the hangar, other engineers came to similar conclusions. The GMC's electrical wiring was minimal but logical, each line color-coded and easy to trace. The braking system, hydraulic yet primitive, could be repaired with nothing more than a wrench and pipe sealant. Even the frame was built for modular replacement, with every major component bolted instead of welded. One engineer laughed softly. "You could assemble this in a field workshop with 5 men and a hammer." "Exactly," Krantz replied, almost bitterly. "And we build machines that need a factory to breathe." That evening, they conducted a test. Reassembling the engine from the stripped parts, they decided to time the process, from bare block to full operation. It took them just under 4 hours. When they poured fuel into the tank and turned the ignition, the motor sputtered, then roared to life with the same steady rhythm as before. The hangar filled with gray exhaust smoke and stunned silence. Krantz stood back, watching the engine idle, hands clasped behind his back. "Gentlemen," he said finally, "this is not a masterpiece. This is evolution. The Americans have evolved past us." One of his peers protested, "But our tanks are superior. Our designs are unmatched." "Designs," Krantz said sharply, "don't win wars when they can't leave the factory." The younger technicians exchanged uneasy glances. Vogel spoke quietly. "Sir, could we copy it?" Krantz looked at him, not with anger, but with sorrow. "We could copy every bolt, every wire, and still fail. Because we try to make it better. That's our curse. Outside, the night sky rumbled with distant explosions. The Allies were already bombing Berlin's outskirts, the war tightening like a noose. Krantz turned off the engine and faced his team. Gentlemen, this truck will outlast us all. Not because it's powerful, but because it was built by men who knew what mattered most. It keeps moving. The group dispersed slowly, some in silence, others still taking notes. Vogel lingered behind. He ran his hand along the truck's mudguard, tracing the worn American letters. GMC, the paint was chipped, the metal dented, yet something about it radiated permanence. In that moment, he understood what his professor meant. Germany had built machines that demanded obedience. America had built machines that offered partnership. When Krantz turned to leave, he said quietly, "Write this down, Vogel. Simplicity is not the enemy of greatness. It's the foundation of it." And as the hangar lights flickered under the tremor of another air raid, the captured GMC truck sat unmoved, a silent monument to the power of practical genius. By the winter of 1944, the war had turned irreversibly against Germany. The front lines were collapsing, fuel was scarce, and factories were in ruins. Yet, tucked away in a battered Wehrmacht depot on the outskirts of Kassel, that single captured GMC truck still ran. Its paint now dulled to gray from dust and smoke. But its engine, that same American six-cylinder heart, refused to die. Every morning, the mechanics gathered around it like worshippers at a shrine. They started it up not because they needed it for battle, but because they needed hope. "Still runs like new," one of them would say, leaning on the hood as the motor hummed. "Of course it does," another replied, half laughing. "It's American. They built it for farmers, not soldiers." But beneath the humor was a deep, gnawing respect and a painful understanding. Every kilometer that truck drove reminded them of what Germany had lost long before the first shot was fired: the ability to think simply. One night, while Allied bombers thundered overhead, a young mechanic named Franz sat in the cab of the GMC, tracing the small plaque on the dashboard. General Motors Corporation, Detroit, Michigan, USA. He couldn't read much English, but the words felt powerful. Distant, industrial, unstoppable. Krantz, now reassigned from Berlin, stood beside the vehicle, hands folded behind his back. His uniform was frayed, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Do you know what this is, Franz?" he asked softly. Franz shook his head. "It's the future," Krantz said. "Ours was craftsmanship. Theirs is production. We built machines to last. They built machines to multiply." He opened the driver's door and gestured inside. "Sit. You feel that?" Franz nodded, gripping the oversized steering wheel. "Comfortable, isn't it?" Krantz continued. "Wide seat, simple dashboard, levers where they should be. It's not luxury, it's logic. Every man, no matter who he is, could drive this truck after 5 minutes of instruction." He walked around the vehicle, his boots crunching the frosted ground. "We make everything an art. They make everything a tool." The engine idled steadily, low and calm, drowning out the distant thunder of bombs. Krantz turned back toward Franz. "Do you know why we're losing this war?" Franz hesitated. "Because they have more factories?" Krantz smiled sadly. "Because they understand that war isn't won with genius. It's won with accessibility, with men who can fix a truck in the rain, with grease on their hands and nothing but a wrench." The words hung heavy in the cold air. Suddenly, the depot lights flickered as explosions rumbled from the nearby rail yard. The men rushed outside, scanning the sky. Allied bombers were hitting supply lines again. In the distance, flames licked the horizon. Krantz barked an order. "Get the truck ready." "We move it now!" Within minutes, Franz climbed into the driver's seat. The GMC roared to life, headlights piercing through the smoke. It was hauling crates of vital equipment, parts too valuable to lose to the flames. As they rolled out through the chaos, the truck's engine never faltered. Even as bombs fell closer, even as shockwaves shook the ground, it kept going. Steady, relentless, unbothered. Franz gripped the wheel tighter, shouting over the noise. "Professor, she's holding!" Krantz smiled faintly, eyes locked ahead. "Of course she is," he said. "She was never built to fail." They made it out just as the depot exploded behind them, a wave of heat and debris lighting up the night. The GMC bounced and rattled, but the engine sang on, carrying them into the dark countryside. When they finally stopped miles away, Franz shut off the ignition and sat in silence. His hands trembled, not from fear but from realization. He looked at Krantz and whispered, "Professor, if every German machine was like this, we'd have never lost." Krantz didn't answer. He simply stared at the truck, smoke curling from the hood like a battle-worn veteran still breathing after the fight. "Franz," he said finally, his voice low, "that's why we lost. Because we built machines to impress. They built them to endure." And in that cold silence, with the truck's engine clicking as it cooled, both men understood. This wasn't just a vehicle. It was a lesson carved in steel. A reminder that the war wasn't decided by who fought harder, but by who built smarter. Spring, 1945. The war was nearly over. Allied armor thundered through the heart of Germany, and the once proud Wehrmacht lay in fragments. Factories were silent, rail lines torn apart, and fuel reserves vanished into smoke. But on a dirt road outside Kassel, one vehicle still moved, the captured GMC. Its olive-drab paint had faded to gray, its American star long since rubbed away. Yet it ran. It hauled wounded soldiers, ammunition, even refugees. When every German truck had broken down or run dry, this one, built thousands of miles away, kept rolling without complaint. Kranz sat in the passenger seat, the wind tearing through the shattered window. He watched the countryside blur by, the end of his nation's mechanical dream etched across the horizon. "Strange," he murmured. "The machine we captured to study became the one we depended on." Franz, now gaunt and hardened by months of retreat, nodded silently. The road twisted through a landscape of ruins, towns that no longer existed, bridges blown to rubble. Yet through it all, the truck never faltered. When they finally stopped near a collapsing bridge, Kranz stepped out and placed a hand on the fender. "Tell me, Franz," he said softly. "What have we learned?" Franz hesitated. "That perfection is useless. If it can't survive the dirt." Kranz smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Then maybe that's the true genius of the Americans." He turned, looking once more at the vehicle that had taught them more than any textbook or laboratory ever could. The distant rumble of approaching Allied engines echoed through the valley. Kranz placed his cap on the hood, straightened his posture and whispered, "You've won, Detroit." As the sun broke through the clouds, the old GMC rumbled one last time, a foreign heart still beating in the ruins of a fallen empire.